Welcome to my channel. This is Bruce the Boss, and today's topic is a very troubling story or situation breaking out in the country of Australia, particularly as it pertains to the Centre for National Resilience in Melbourne, which is a glorified quarantine camp. But before we get into this, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, like this video, comment on this video, and to just let everyone know what's going on, share this video. Yes, I'm in the United States, but one of the reasons why I started this channel is I just wanted to speak to what's going on around the world, moves that are happening, not just here in the continental United States, but whether it be France, the UK, and yes, to our people in Australia, because for one thing, we're all part of the same human family, part of the same struggle for a lot of us who have questions about the agenda being put in place, the information we're being told, and don't like these draconian measures being forced upon the populace. And there's also the chance of what happens in one part of the world is more like a test run that could be implemented in other parts of the world, including where you live. Because, for instance, as soon as Europe started doing their national lockdowns in places like France, Spain, the UK, sure enough, the United States follows suit. So what happens in other parts of the world, usually many governments will follow suit accordingly. And so what's transpiring in Australia is very troubling. I'll get into the specifics of the Centers for National Resilience in a moment, but Australia has really been on my heart since I started my original channel before that got nuked, just a little over a year ago, actually today. And I remember one of the initial stories that really got me going was a woman by the name of Zoe Lee, who was trying to organize a peaceful protest, and she couldn't have been more emphatic about this in her Facebook post, organize a peaceful protest on September the 5th, 2020, which was Freedom Day in Australia. And on September the 2nd, 3 days before the event, Australian police come to her home and arrest her. And keep in mind, she's very much pregnant at this point. She is definitely in her third trimester easily, and on her way to I believe a sonogram for her, to monitor the baby and her condition. And the police come in and arrest her in front of her spouse and in front of her small child, who was about 4, 5, or 6 years old, very small, very young child, over a Facebook post. The event didn't even happen yet, and they arrest her. She said, "Hey, I've got my sonogram appointment with my gynecologist and what have you. I'll just delete the post. It's no big deal." Nope, they arrested her for an event that hadn't even happened yet. Keep in mind, the Australian government literally okayed a Black Lives Matter protest maybe a month or so before this. Like literally, not just turned a blind eye to the protest, but literally signed the court documents allowing them the permit to protest. But then I digress. And now I've been following a lot of troubling things or developments that have been coming out regarding their new lockdown measures. Take a quick listen.
$5,000 for on-the-spot breach of home quarantine, $5,000 on the spot for lying on a permit, $5,000 on the spot fine for lying to a contact tracer, $3,000 on the spot fine for breaching the 2-person exercise rule, $3,000 on the spot fine for breaching rules going into regional New South Wales, $5,000 from the
Australian Defence Force and New South Wales Police working together on the back of contact tracing information. Went to a home in southwest Sydney yesterday morning and found a person that should be there, wasn't there. They made a number of inquiries and not that long after, that person returned to the front of the house in a motor vehicle. That person was spoken to by police, an ADF was issued, a penalty infringement notice, stated that he'd hopped in his car and went out for some fresh air and hadn't been anywhere else. But the point is that if you are going to behave like this, yesterday over 2,300 houses visited. If you're going to behave like this, if you're going to step outside the health orders, you will be checked on and you will get an infringement notice, and that person will continue to be checked on and make sure that they comply. There was another incident.
Now, I understand the history of Australia, and it's being founded by Great Britain as pretty much a prison country where they sent all of their inmates, but they are literally treating the citizens of Australia like they're still in prison, like inmates not even being allowed to go out into the prison yard much at all. You heard the video of how the first representative or spokeswoman said that they were going to pretty much fine you 6 ways to Sunday, anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 for breaking quarantine, lying to someone about contact tracing, things like that nature. And then you heard that police chief literally say, you know what, we are knocking on doors, we're checking to make sure you are at home where you're supposed to be. An individual literally did not even say he went to a public place or setting. He just needed to get some fresh air and do a quick drive because he couldn't be cooped up in his house all day, because it literally will feel like you're locked up in solitary confinement, which is the worst punishment you can do to an individual. And he admitted, yes, he had to admit, because they came to his house to check on him. And he wasn't there until he did eventually show up and pull up in his car. But yeah, he said, I just went for a drive to get some air. Apparently, they are locking you down. So one of the things that did trouble me, I don't know if you had a chance to take a look. So I just so happened to come across this tweet here that said conspiracy theorists in Australia are being vindicated. And I'm like, wait, what the heck? Could this really be real? I took a look at it a little bit more. This does appear to be a legit letter coming from the Australian government and Department of Finance, as it pertains to the Australian government working with the Victorian government to build an accommodation facility at 135 Donnybrook Road that will be used for mandatory quarantine accommodations for the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic, which at this point looks to be indefinite. With the facility will be called the Centre for National Resilience in Melbourne, the center where, when it opens. And I'm like, wait, is this real? And as I read on a little bit more, it talks about how the Multiplex has been selected as the managing contractor. Multiplex, the name of the organization for the center, and it is expected that work on site will start from early August 2021, which we're practically past early August now, so they've likely already begun this, with completion of the first 500 beds at the end of the year. And Multiplex is an established construction company that has delivered over 1,000 projects, and because of their outstanding job, this is why they were chosen. It looks like this was written by and or signed off by Chris Keeling and Kylie Dennis, if I'm pronouncing that right. And I'm like, is this real? So I did a little bit more digging, and there seems to be more supporting evidence that this is a real thing. I found this here by Tom Cowie on August the 14th last week, talking more again about the construction of Melbourne Centre for National Resilience, the unwieldy name given to the new quarantine facility in Mickleham, with the camp set to open by the end of the year. A community engagement session was held earlier in the week on August the 12th to try to fast track this 1,000-bed accommodation, which we read from the letter. They'll start to open as soon as they have half of that, 500 beds. The project is being modeled on the Howard Springs Center in the Northwest Territory, which has proven to be highly effective at preventing leaks of COVID-19 compared to hotel quarantine. The Multiplex has been engaged to construct the facility with 80% of the buildings to be fabricated off-site. The center can be extended to 3,000 beds, but will be operational again as soon as 500 beds are made available. Again, looking into this a little bit further, and I'll put the links of these sites in the description box below. More than glad to. So here is a look at the official website page for the organization known as Multiplex. Again, they are reaffirming or confirming that this site, this camp, this facility is in fact underway. So creating additional quarantine capacity and enhancing Australia's ability to respond to future emergencies. And then just talking about how this is located just outside of Victoria. I thought it was just outside of Melbourne, unless if this is referring to the company itself because it talked about Mickleham, but this location in Victoria, Australia, managing contractor. So status under construction. The client is definitely the Australian Government Department of Finance, much like what we saw on that letterhead. So this appears to be a real thing. And again, this is the site for the organization known as Multiplex. Again, just outside of Melbourne, Australia. Now, I will say at the present moment, the facility is just going to be used to quarantine those who have arrived into Australia. I'm not going to say it's being used currently for anything else. As it stands right now, if you're flying into the country of Australia, particularly coming into Melbourne, apparently on the northwest side of the continent, you're set to quarantine in a hotel, and they're making the argument that the hotel is just not as adequate to try to quarantine and contain the virus for those who may have potentially contracted it from wherever they were outside of the country. That's the current measure. That's the current usage. However, it's very troubling when you put that in conjunction with everything else you just heard and to know about how restrictive they are getting and how draconian the Australian government is getting in restricting your ability to do anything. That includes leaving your home, exercising with another individual, which is funny because exercise and good physical fitness seems to be really the best way of combating this, because you look at all of the individuals who are succumbing to this the most in terms of demographic, aside from the elderly, because you can't fight time itself, it is those who are suffering from some form of comorbidities, including mostly over 80% of those who are overweight and or obese seem to be succumbing to the worst of symptoms and even possibly death. And a lot of the other comorbidities all are, for the most part, related to lifestyle that could otherwise be fixed had the individuals either eaten right and or exercised more. And here they're saying you're not even allowed to exercise in groups of 2 or more, I believe. But we know where Australia is heading or could possibly head with this based upon their previous track record. Again, they arrested Zoe Lee for an event that she hadn't even attended yet, but just talked about or tried to organize on Facebook. We see them coming after people, checking to make sure that they are in their home, despite the fact that there's very little evidence of major spreading of the virus in outdoor settings. Not to say it's impossible, but extremely low risk of major spread when in outdoors and exposed to lots of sunlight, as well as temperatures over 85 degrees. And yet again, they are making sure that you are locked in. Even if you are socially distant from anyone and everyone, you're apparently not allowed to move. And so it's just very dangerous to think where this could be headed in Australia, and could this be coming to other countries around the world. I wouldn't be surprised to see this happening in Germany. If you try it in France the way things are right now, those people they're already revolting. So I can't even say much. They will bring their weapons. And President Macron will become the latest Marie Antoinette. And that's not a threat. I'm just saying, based upon what I know, those French are not playing. I can only assume that Australia is getting the worst of this, and you might not see this in too many other places. Is because, and I remember when I first moved to San Antonio, one of my coworkers or peers talked about gun control and how Australia gun violence dramatically decreased after they passed a law, I believe it was 1997, in which case thousands, if not millions, of Australians voluntarily turned in their firearms, at least certain caliber firearms that were otherwise considered illegal. And now you have a disarmed population that couldn't even fight back, really, if they wanted to. And this is where we're seeing the worst of it, in the one country where it's almost impossible to get your hands on a firearm to fight back against the government, which is another reason why the Second Amendment is such a vital thing, because you'll notice the U.S. government is doing a lot of overreach, although they're also using the private corporations or sectors to do a lot of the dirty work, hence why they get some support from citizens who aren't paying attention. It's not censorship if it's not coming from the government. A private industry can do whatever they want kind of argument, despite the fact that a lot of these private industries are actually working in cahoots with the federal government or with the local governments as well to do the dirty work for them, and they can't seem to put that connection. But I digress. I do think certain countries like the United States may be protected from these particular camps being set up here in the United States. But again, you never know the way things are really de-escalating around the world. But that's what's happening in Australia right now. Again, I'm very concerned with this morphing from a facility to house those who are coming from out of the country back home, or for visitors coming in from out of the country to just visit, to be forced to quarantine for the first 2 weeks in this facility outside of Melbourne in Mickleham. Just very concerned with that morphing into a camp to place those who are unvaxxed and or considered a terror threat, a reference to the Department of Homeland Security here in the United States that dares to try to link those who are against COVID restrictions to threats of terrorism. But again, I digress. Everything has a starting point. It's known as the death of 1,000 cuts for a reason. They start small and then just keep adding up until eventually it gets you. You got to pay attention to what's going on around the world before you look back and you realize, holy snap, my back's against the wall. How did I get against the wall already? And there's no place else to go. And this is not the direction I think you want your future generations, your kids to be raised in, your grandkids, what have you, because will have no mechanism. So the time to fight is now. The time to really pay attention to what's going on is now. Talk to your local leaders, your officials. You got to get out there and make your voices heard as well. March, protest. Don't care about whether or not if the media covers it or tries to label you crazy or alone, because you're really not alone. But they will censor a lot of these movements and protests that are happening across the world, especially in Europe, especially in France, and particularly in Italy and or the UK. You won't see major coverage because they don't want you fighting back. They don't want you knowing what's actually going on. But that's the video. Let me know what you think in the comment section regarding this latest development. Do you think it's a nothing burger? Do you think, or do you trust the Australian government to limit this just to those coming in from outside the country, whether they are residents or citizens of the country or visitors? Do you think they're going to just limit it to them? Or can this potentially morph into a place to send individuals who are otherwise not conformists? That's my video. Let me know what you're thinking. Again, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, like this video, comment on this video. This is Bruce the Boss, and I'm out. Peace.